All right, everyone ready to get started? Well, thanks for coming today. My name is Jacob Ternes. I'm the coordinator of student involvement in Greek life here at Fort Hays State. If I start to cough during this presentation, don't freak out. I get a cough every winter. So I promise I'm not dying. That's why I grabbed some water. But so today we're going to talk about the role of fraternities and sororities on campus. My role here with Fort Hays, I advise our fraternity and sorority community, our interfraternity council, Panhellenic Council, the Order of Omega Honor Society. My background is I'm a member of Phi Delta Theta fraternity. I did my undergraduate work at Emporia State University. That's where I joined Phi Delta. After graduating from there, I spent 2 years working for the national headquarters or international headquarters for Phi Delta Theta before coming back to Kansas and getting my master's degree at K-State. So fraternities and sororities is something that's important to me. It's obviously it's what I do here professionally, but it's been part of my life for the past 10 years or so. So as you look at the news, you hear a lot about fraternities and sororities. You see things like the Dark Power Fraternities articles in the Atlantic. You see you hear about the Rolling Stone article. You hear about cases of sexual assault. You hear about hazing deaths. But then on the flip side, you also maybe are seeing campaigns about how it's the best academic support system on campus, or how it has allowed students to develop the best social relationships they never thought was possible. So like there's kind of this dynamic of what you see in the media versus what the organizations are saying about themselves, and there's definitely a disconnect between those two images. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the histories where fraternity and sororities came from, some of the issues and changes they've faced over time, kind of how we got to where we are today, and where I think that we should go from the future. So I'll try to draw distinctions between where I'm giving you fact and where I'm giving you my opinion. And on a lot of these slides, I don't want to just talk at you this whole time. Some of these I have just a topic and a couple of pictures, and I want to hear your thoughts and your ideas on these areas. So I'm hoping that this will be more of an interactive presentation, not just me lecturing to you for the next hour. So if we go back, a brief history of fraternities and sororities. Fraternities are as old as the United States. And secret societies have existed prior to that, but fraternities and sororities in the context of being Greek letter organizations are kind of unique to the United States, but they've been around basically as long as we've been a country. So Phi Beta Kappa was founded December 5th, 1776. If you remember your history, July 4th, 1776 was a pretty important date. So not too much after that, we have our first fraternity on a college campus. I'm going to talk a little bit about this as we talk about why these groups were founded, but I put up there, so Phi Beta Kappa is the English spelling of that organization, and then it has their Greek motto, and then the translation of their Greek motto below. I don't speak Greek, so I won't try to say what their motto is in Greek, but if you look at it, it's a three-word motto, and it begins with Phi, Beta, and Kappa. So these Greek letter organizations, people like, why the heck are they Greek? They have nothing to do with the land of Greece. Students who formed these were studying Latin and Greek and Roman, and like this was very much ingrained into their student curriculum. And so they identified with ideals in these, in the lessons that they were learning, so they incorporated them into their student organizations. So Phi Beta Kappa is no longer a secret organization. It's one of the most prestigious honor societies in the U.S., and so they've released a lot of their secrets, and that's one of the things that they've released is their motto and why they chose the letters that they chose when they picked their name. I'm not going to give you the full breakdown of the history, but the Union Triad and Miami Triad, those were clusters of new fraternities being founded. So Union College, there was a group of 3 organizations that founded all around the same time. Miami University in Ohio, there was a grouping of 3 new organizations that founded. So a lot of times these groups kind of bounced off each other and formed because they saw a group get created and they didn't quite agree with what they were saying, so they formed their own similar group. Women's group came along a little bit later, and in the sorority or women's fraternity world, they kind of identify 3 different firsts. So as you look, all of these organizations have Greek letters now, but they didn't all start that way. So Alpha Delta Pi was the first sisterhood, but it was initially called, oh, I should have kept this in there, like the Aladatha Society. So it didn't have Greek letters in their original name, but they've since changed it. So that was like considered the first sisterhood, the first group of women who came together to form this sisterhood. There was the first group that called themselves a women's fraternity, and then there was the first group that actually incorporated the Greek letters into their name right off the bat, much in the same way that fraternities did. Today, I'm going to talk about the NIC and the NPC. There are other Greek organizations out there, academic Greek organizations, multicultural Greek organizations, but my experience has been with the North American Interfraternity Conference and the National Panhellenic Conference, and that's what we have on our campus here, and so that's where I'm going to focus my conversation on. So please don't take this as that these are only the groups that exist, but this is where my background is, and this is what we have on our campus today. So those are the groups that we're going to talk about. So the NIC was founded in 1909, and it represents 73 international or national men's fraternities. And then the NPC was founded in 1902, and it represents 26 member organizations. So these are umbrella organizations where the different individual fraternities and sororities exist under those umbrellas. The NPC acts more as a governing body and actually sets rules and regulations for their organizations. The NIC is more of just kind of a gathering together of the minds and creating some resources and doing stuff together. There are a lot more fraternities out there than there are sororities. You can kind of see by the numbers there. And the governance structure of fraternities is much more loose on the national, international level. But these are kind of the groups that we're going to talk about today. So if we go back again to their history and like why these groups started, these groups started off as student organizations because they wanted to get together and discuss other ideas, current events, other items of literature, but they didn't really have that opportunity in their academic classrooms. There was a lot of strict rules on university campuses. Things like the student union didn't really exist right off the top. You know, when things happened, early campuses had academic buildings, maybe like the president's office, and maybe housing, but there wasn't a whole lot of campus life happening. So these students came together and formed their own little groups and had meetings in halls and had meetings in private housing and to discuss current events and discuss things that were happening on campus and dissatisfaction with faculty members and curriculums and those kinds of things. But they weren't really supposed to do that, and universities could come down pretty strict on them if they found out about it. So the secrecy developed out of necessity. They couldn't just go on campus, during class and talk about these organizations for fear of what might happen to them. They could be expelled. So these groups developed in secrecy, and they took examples from from other secret organizations, and like I said, from the Greek traditions and the Roman traditions to kind of come up with these mottos and the handshakes and the badges and these identifiers so that members would be able to recognize other members, but they wouldn't be things that were so obvious that an outsider would recognize those items. So a lot of times these were held on shared values. Like I said, a group might form and have dedicated issues that they wanted to discuss, and then another group said, well, we want to have a men's group as well, but we don't really care about the issues that they care about. We care about this other set of things. So this idea of shared values is the things that were important to those men at the time. They came together to discuss those items. If it wasn't important to them, they didn't want to be a part of this group, so they formed their own group. So this idea of shared values, and those idea of shared values has passed along to our current fraternities and sororities. As a member of Phi Delta Theta, I can say that our founding principles are friendship, sound learning, and a high sense of morality. So those are the ideals that my organization was founded on. Those of you who are in here that are members can probably tell me what ideals your organization were founded on. And there's some similarities and some overlap, but at the time there was a unique need that was identified on that campus, and so they were founded around those ideals. So the question, and kind of where we're going to go with today's discussion, is how did we get from that foundation, that idea of these students coming together for good to discuss, have lively debates, have shared values, have all these things in common. How do we get from that foundation to this? So some of you maybe don't know the Animal House reference very well, but that is the picture of Animal House. You know, the decrepit building in the background, the heavy alcohol consumption, the hazing, you know, all these things that people think of, the stereotypes that are associated with fraternities and sororities. How did we get to that? And so, you know, from where we were founded in the 1800s and early 1900s to where we are now, fraternities and sororities have gone through, you know, a lot of ups and downs, you know, periods of strength, periods of weakness. The Civil War was a big challenge for these organizations. World War I and World War II were big challenges for these organizations because men weren't going to college as much. There was the opportunity for women's groups to gain some strength during these times because you know, as more and more women started to come onto college campuses, more and more women's groups were founded. And then as we get back into like the 1960s, the student population was very different. You know, like we see pictures of protests and riots and what students wanted, and they didn't like this idea of an elitist established organization. They wanted to rebel against those establishments. And so fraternities and sororities kind of faltered. And they were seen as these elitist organizations. You know, one of the things that happened is that the drinking age was raised from 18 to 21, and these fraternity men had been living together in houses, and all of a sudden they could no longer legally drink out in the bar and at the establishment. But they had these houses. So they started saying, hey, why don't you just come to our place? We'll start having these parties here. You can still come drink with us. So that idea of the fraternity party got its roots in the raising of the drinking age, because these students could no longer go out and drink at the bar. So the fraternities became that hub of the college party. And so, you know, like there was this campus culture and some counterculture, and, you know, kind of all mixed in together, and then you throw alcohol into the mix. And so with this in the 70s and 80s and into the early 90s, you had higher instances of alcohol use. And then along with alcohol, we know that hazing becomes more of an issue when there's alcohol involved. You had alumni that were getting disengaged because the things that they identified with and the positive experience that they identified with as students was no longer the case. So alumni were backing off away from the organizations. With alumni backing off meant that there was less money into these organizations, so chapter houses started to fall into disrepair, coupled with the drinking and everything that was happening in these houses. That's kind of where we got to the point of the 1980s and the 1990 fraternities and the problems that we see, and the stereotypes that we're dealing with today are a result of that, because stereotypes were founded in reality. I mean, these things were happening. So in the 90s into 2000s, there has kind of been this idea of a return to values for our fraternities and sororities, and a lot of really positive things have come out of this. I've just thrown a few images up here. Maybe some of you who are members will recognize some of these things, but things like FIPG is a group of organizations who came together and say, look, we've got a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds that are on college campuses and unsupervised. How can we put some rules and some policies in place so that they're not destroying their houses, they're not, you know, excessively drinking, they're not hazing? So the formation of policies and best practices, and hey, maybe it's not the best idea to just have an open cake party and invite anybody in off the street, you know. So, you know, because in the 80s, like, risk management wasn't even an idea that they thought of. So like FIPGs kind of come to kind of help those, you know, help kind of put some of these rules and regulations in place that our groups now, you know, hopefully they have a better understanding of. I think we're still kind of trying to work out, you know, living that old stereotype and reconnecting with values. I think we're still in kind of a transition period, and we'll see where we go in the future. But other entities, you know, like Sigma Phi Epsilon launched the Balanced Man program. Sigma Alpha Epsilon has the True Gentleman, and they just eliminated the pledging process. Phi Delta Theta did alcohol-free chapter housing in all of their houses across the country. So that was implemented in 1997, and fully, you know, chapters were expected to be fully compliant by 2000. So we're at 15 years of alcohol-free housing for a single fraternity. Other fraternities have gone somewhere along the continuum of allowing alcohol or not allowing alcohol. And so sometimes if you're in good standing, you can have alcohol in your chapter houses, and if you're on probation, they take it away from you. Sororities, the NPC, has put a policy in place that says all member organizations of NPC should have alcohol-free housing. So all 26 of those organizations don't allow alcohol in their house. So it's not that their members are prohibited from drinking, but they're prohibited from drinking and having alcohol in their chapter facilities. Oops, I backed up. Other things that have shown up. Fired Up is a company that started off with the idea of how can we recruit better members into our organizations. They've since kind of spread out from there. How do we market fraternities and sororities better? How do we engage non-members on campus? How do we, lots of things that Fired Up Productions has done. The Rethink Greek campaign is something new this year, and Fort Hays State University is participating in that. If you follow our page, you maybe have seen some of those Rethink Greek images or social media posts, but it's this idea is that we need to be actively engaged in sharing the positive things that fraternities and sororities do, because the media is highlighting all of the negative things. So it's not that those negative things don't exist, but the positive things do exist as well. So as members, we have to promote those items. So that's what Rethink Greek is. The Fraternal Health and Safety Initiative is something, again, groups have gotten together and identified that hazing is still an issue, that alcohol consumption is still an issue, that sexual assault is an issue on campus. And so how do we train our members? How do we provide resources and programs for our members so they can combat those issues on campus? The Association of Fraternal Leadership and Values obviously has values in the name. So it's an association of groups gathering together to try to refocus chapter leadership in a positive direction. Hazing Prevention Week, Hazing Prevention Consortium. So all of these kind of things have come about in the late 90s and 2000s to kind of return Greek life to their founding values. So I think there's been a lot of positive work in the last decade. And so we've kind of, we're kind of in that ground right now where you still see a lot of the negative stuff happening, but that we're also starting to see a lot of positive things. And as current members of organizations, it's our job to kind of try to continue to grow the positive and to minimize the negative stuff as much as we can. So I think pretty much everything I've given you so far is factual information, like you can go and research, and I might have messed up a few details here and there. From here, I'm going to kind of give you my perspective on where I think we should go and some of the issues that are facing fraternities and sororities right now, and how we continue to be relevant on our campuses. This is also the part of the presentation where I would really like to hear from all of you and interact, because like I said, I don't want to just talk for forever. So I'm gonna throw some different ideas up here, and I want to kind of have a conversation about some of them. So one of the things that this active discussion piece is going to kind of weave itself into everything that we talk about as far as these other issues. But I think it's important for our student members to be actively engaged in the discussions about fraternities and sororities. You have involved alumni, people like me, professionals, who work for headquarters, professionals that work for universities. Like, we have a lot of ideas, and we're doing a lot of discussions, but the students, this is your experience, and so it's important for these students to be actively involved. And there's a lot of benefit in having these discussions, and having discussions where two people have differing opinions about a topic. And I think that fraternities and sororities are a great place to have that, because you have the shared bonds, you have the shared initiation vows, you have the shared ritual. And so, if two fraternity brothers or two sorority sisters go head to head and disagree and get pretty heated, hopefully at the end of that meeting they can revisit their ritual and agree, hey, we disagreed, we were able to come to a conclusion or not, but I'm not going to let that go and destroy our friendship because we have this deeper shared connection. So I think that fraternities and sororities have the ability to create spaces on campus that allows students to disagree and encourage students to disagree and to discuss, because what I don't want to see happen is I don't want to see one individual from an organization or a Greek advisor or a headquarters to just kind of lay down the law and say this is where we're gonna, this is what we're gonna do, and not have our members participate in that. Is anybody in here familiar with the two acts that are being discussed in Congress right now, the Campus Safe Act and the Campus Fair Act? Any show of hands, anybody? So those are a couple of things that have been introduced to address sexual assault on college campuses, and the NIC and the NPC both supported those acts from the get-go. But the issue is that they never went to their member organizations to ask if they thought supporting these acts was a good idea. And so this, this discussion has kind of been happening since June or July, but just recently several national organizations have come out with statements saying, hey, you know what, we've taken some time, we've looked at the language here, and we really don't support this. And so individual organizations within NPC, those 26 organizations, started speaking out against this and creating a dialogue within that umbrella organization. And so the result was NPC withdrew their support from the SAFE Act. So there's still discussion about the FAIR Act, and there's good things in that act and probably not so good things in that act. But had no members started the discussion, had no headquarters started that discussion, and they just let the few leaders at the top of NPC drive their legislative agenda, there wouldn't have been this discussion that's happening right now. Because there has been, even on our campus, there's been a lot of discussion about these acts. And so I think that's good. So that's our role as members and as participants in this, is we have to be actively involved. We can't just let the leaders, whether it's the national organization leaders, the umbrella groups, the campus professionals, I don't want to dictate what our community does. And so that active involvement piece needs to come from our members. So those of you in here who are members, how do you actively engage in participation? What are the ways that you can do that? Within your chapters, within the Panhellenic or in a fraternity council community, within the overall community, how do you do that? What venues are available to you?
I think within our three sororities we have on campus now, just going to Panhellenic and understanding what's happening at Panhellenic and going to the events that we hold and stuff like that, just because it creates a lot more involvement. And I feel like we have a better community that way. That's something that we personally struggle with in our chapter. So we're working on it.
Yeah. So every Monday on our campus, every Monday at 3:45 in the afternoon is when our Panhellenic sororities come together. Our entire Greek community is invited to come together at 4:30, and then our fraternity community has their meeting at 5. So every week we have this gathering of our different organizations, because we have 3 sororities and 4 fraternities on campus, representing about 250 students. And so we have those weekly opportunities for them to all come together as a community, but then there's also the opportunities of their individual chapter meetings to come together and discuss issues. Good. Anything else?
I'm just curious why you guys joined the sororities or fraternities. When I was in college, I didn't join. It wasn't my thing. But I was just curious why you guys joined.
I know me personally, I came here hating sororities. My mom was in it for a couple of years, and she told me a bunch of horror stories about the hazing that she had to go through and everything. But I came here because I found a support system, because a lot of our sororities here, they're so, not that there's so little of us, but we're all very close-knit in our community, even with different, like some of us, we have best friends in other sororities. We all come together, and we're all one community, and it's not so much for us about status here, so much more about support and finding family and friends that you know you can go home to at the end of the day, and they will be there for you no matter what.
This is the same for me. I was on campus a year and a half before I even thought about it, because I was like, no, not happening. And then Tri Sigma came, and I just really kind of found my home. And it was somewhere, I mean, just talking to the national ladies and seeing their love for the organization and their passion for Greek life really kind of inspired me. So it's the best decision I've ever made at all. It was a weird decision for me, because I definitely was not someone that wanted to be in a sorority, but it was a good decision.
I think so. I also joined for I would say the bond that I made during recruitment, but I think other things that drew me to it is I was in high school, I academic and also service oriented, like that's what I was passionate about, and I also had a very negative perspective. And I think maybe that comes from like our small towns, all we see is Animal House growing up. But I was, I guess, impressed that they have to do philanthropy hours, and so I knew that I would be still engaged in service while I was at the university, and also the GPA requirement. So that first semester of college, well, I joined my first year. That can be really difficult, and my GPA like plummeted because I was not prepared for the level of academics. I guess I never studied in high school, and having that academic support system, because my GPA went from like a 2.8, and I think I graduated with like a 3.7. So having that expectation of achieving high academics, even I don't know the others, but I know when I was a member here, the expectation was academics came before social. So like if you can't have a high GPA, then you don't get to attend the fun things that people assume that's all sorority women do. But they don't realize that we do a lot of hard work. Unless if you're not doing that hard work, you don't get the benefits of the fun side of things.
Do all of the sororities and fraternities have to have some kind of philanthropy? Is that not a requirement?
It's not a requirement, but I would say that's a core value that all of our groups share, whether it's identifying a specific organization that they partner with, like for example Sigma Phi Epsilon is Big Brothers Big Sisters, or Tri Sigma doesn't have a specific one, but there's a few that you work with.
We have the Robbie Page Memorial. Robbie Page was the son of one of our presidents, and he had polio, and so it started as a polio, but once they found a cure for that, it's now Sigma Serves Children. So we have 3 different hospitals around the country that we have the Robbie Page Memorial Playroom in, and that's the kind of stuff that we do.
Yeah, so it could be, so I think maybe that's what I was thinking of, is the Sigma Serves Children isn't necessarily a specific organization, but they do quite a bit with, so they're focused on children. So yeah, I would say that it's a shared value across nearly every fraternity or sorority is to have that service aspect.
Do Little Sisters still exist? When I was in college, that was a big thing, like, hey, we need women at our party. We're gonna have Little Sisters show up.
Sometimes they're still like chapter sweethearts or things like that, but the Little Sisters of the 80s and 90s and maybe other decades doesn't really exist anymore. And that's kind of the FIPG and the policies. They realized that creating those sister organizations had a tendency to elevate concerns of alcohol misuse and hazing, and so you had to earn the right of your big sister, things like that. So yeah, so groups have kind of spoken out against those kind of activities, but still there are sometimes where they have chapter sweethearts, or they have like they kind of almost like crowning a homecoming queen or something like that for a fraternity, like saying that this is a person who we value. So some of those things still exist, but the wide-scale sister organizations don't anymore.
We have a national policy in our sorority against being like little sisters or sister organizations to fraternities.
So the active discussion piece, is something like all of our members have to be actively involved, but some of the other things we're going to talk about is how these organizations exist with the university. And I chose these pictures because I think they represent a couple of different ways that universities can interact with fraternities and sororities. So as we mentioned before, when these were founded, they were secret organizations, so there was no relationship between the organizations and the universities. As they became more well-known, as groups spread out, universities were kind of struggling with how to deal with these. They knew they existed on their campus, but are they a full student organization? Does the university have jurisdiction over them? Are they part of that national organization that they have jurisdiction over them? So one of the approaches that universities have come up with is the arm's length approach. Like, yeah, we know you exist, but we're not going to really train you so much. We maybe will have somebody who's a part-time Greek advisor, but we're not going to really fully engage you as a student organization. And the rationale for that was that the less a university knows and is involved, the less liability that the university has if and when those things go wrong. On the other end of the spectrum is when a university kind of coddles these organizations and doesn't give them any sort of authority at all and says, you're just a special subset of student organizations. You don't really have any special rights or responsibilities. We're going to treat you like other student organizations, but we're not gonna, we're not gonna really let you self-govern. We're not gonna let you do your own judicial. We're not gonna let you have your own special set of rules. So they completely take over those fraternities and sororities, and don't really, there's really no different than any other student organization on campus. And then the middle picture is more of an embrace between the chapters, the national organizations, and the university. A good partnership, because there are lots of resources that a national or international fraternity or sorority offers. There's a lot of great resources that university offers. And so I think that it is good for fraternities to have an active relationship with chapters on their campus, because they're students on the campus, they live in the communities here. The things that they do impact the greater community, the greater university community. So you don't want to, in my opinion, you don't want to keep them at arm's length, because just because the university isn't necessarily liable for their actions if they keep them at arm's length, those actions still have impact on our campus. And so pretending that those issues don't exist doesn't really help them to be solved. But then on the other end here, trying to coddle them in such a way to prevent any issues from ever happening isn't a good fix either. So fraternities and sororities are unique because they're recognized by their national organizations, they're recognized by the university, and ideally there's a good partnership there. And if a group is suspended for a negative behavior, they're suspended by the university. Hopefully the national organization will support that, and vice versa. If they fail to meet the responsibilities from the national organization, the university will support that. So here at Fort Hays, I feel that I have a pretty good working relationship with others across the university, and then working with national organizations, but there are some limitations. So my job is only 50% for fraternities and sororities, and the other 50% is student organizations at large. So while I would like to be in like a full hug, I'm kind of doing like this one-arm thing right now, because I can't dedicate the amount of time to just working with those organizations. So it's always this kind of balancing act of how involved is the university in the running of those organizations, how much are they self-governed, by being led by their own members, their own advisors, how much do they fall underneath the jurisdiction of their national organizations. So I think, universities across the country are still trying to kind of figure out this balance and partnering with the national organizations. And so it's just about finding that balance that works for the community that we're in. Any questions or comments about this? You guys like my picture choices?
What percent of the student population is in a sorority or fraternity?
Right now, about 6% of our on-campus numbers. So
What
when
about student organizations, other than that, how many students does that encompass? Do you have an idea, or is it kind of hard to nail?
we don't really have that great of an idea, because I can tell you that we have 120 student organizations right now, but I don't have full accurate rosters of them. With fraternities and sororities, they were actively always checking their rosters, and because they do they do grade checks and they do all sorts of things. With just general student organizations, we ask them to submit their rosters, but there's not that kind of constant oversight. And there's also, for me working with 7 fraternities and sororities, I can have a little more interaction compared to 120 general student organizations. So we don't have the same level of data on general student organizations.
But do you have any kind of sense, is it 12% or the population of the campus, or it's just really hard to nail?
I would say it's probably higher than 12%, maybe somewhere around 25.
But you have some overlapping too. Some are 2 or 3 organizations.
Yes. Yeah, and so one statistic that we do know is that 89% of our students who are in fraternities and sororities are also in at least one other student organization. So yeah, there's a very high level of overlap between fraternity and sorority members and other campus organizations. Yes?
I have a kind of a question about gender equality, I guess, because it's not true that the sororities and fraternities are the only campus organizations that are gender segregated. And so a couple of questions is why should they be, and is there any talk in merging them and making them so that men and women both join the same organization?
So I believe you're right. I think that fraternities and sororities are the only organizations that are specifically listed as an exemption in Title IX. So there is a specific Title IX exemption for social fraternities and sororities. You know, I think there's a lot of discussion about that, and on college campuses right now, kind of depending where they fall in this relationship with the university, there are college campuses that are saying you can no longer exist as single-sex organizations. If you want to continue to exist on our campus, you have to become co-ed. And I think a lot of times colleges react that way, in large part because guys have a tendency to screw up, and so they think that if they put some women into those organizations, maybe the guys will be a little more level-headed. But you know, it's one of the things. So fraternities and sororities have, you know, a large network, and with NIC and NPC, and there are some lobbying groups out there that continue to support the idea of being single-sex organizations. And so I don't, from a government.
What are the rationales they offer for why that's better, other than just tradition?
You know, I don't know if I can answer that. I don't really know.
The Supreme Court said, you know, separate is inherently unequal. There's no other reason to separate two groups of people other than to treat them unequally.
Well, I would counter that. I mean, it's common interest and some things they like to do together. You know, I advise a sorority, and they do crafts. The guys aren't going to want to do crafts. I mean, they do things that they all enjoy doing together that not the other gender would often want to do. I'm not saying it's totally exclusive, but I think it's that camaraderie of that sex and being able to do things that they would all enjoy. I mean, it's Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. It's very similar. Not that it has to be exclusive.
Well, I think you can make the same argument for that too.
Well, sure, I know.
Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts do pretty much the same thing, don't they? I mean, could I get some input from some of the sorority members? Do you do a lot of activities that men would not be interested in doing?
I mean, being in a sorority myself, part of it honestly, I kind of like that it's just girls, because there's some things that we talk about within our sisterhood that we can bond with each other. Things that we really only feel comfortable maybe sharing with someone of our same sex, or someone that we know is our sister, that they are our family. I don't know if I feel very comfortable sometimes, especially if I was living in house or something with guys in there. I mean, there are some honor societies on campus that are in fact co-ed, but to me it's just like, it's a sense of closeness for me. Like, I have sisters, I have family that I actually chose, like, not to make that sound bad, it's just, yeah. But I mean, I'm sure the same is probably with fraternity. They have brothers, they have that bond, and that people have made those bonds with their own friends as brothers for centuries. And I just feel like that helps me with a sense of closeness.
And I don't think it's a lot about, like, I think it's just so much about, like, sisterhood. Like, this is our sisterhood, and these are my sisters, and I know I can count on them. I don't think it's necessarily anything about gender equality or discriminating against the other gender. Tri Sigma was the first sorority to actually say, whatever you identify as on your, like, school transcripts, whether if you identify as a female, even if you're a male, you can join our sorority. We were the first sorority to do that. So I don't think it's necessarily about discrimination. I think it's just about that ritual and the sisterhood and the bond that we have as women or as men. I honestly would feel pretty uncomfortable if we had some men in there too. We do talk about some weird things as women. I'm sure guys talk about weird things too. So.
And that's not something that I included in this presentation, but that isn't an area of discussion among fraternities and sororities right now, is what is their position on people who are transgender. You know, if they're biologically a male but they identify as a female, or vice versa. And so some groups are being very progressive and addressing this, and you know, if I didn't know that Tri Sigma was the first, but and then other groups are kind of digging in their heels and saying, no, like, we're a men's organization and you have to be a male man to be in our group. So, you know, it's a discussion that is happening right now amongst our organizations. Holly, did you have anything else to add?
Well, I just think that it goes back to why they were founded. So I feel like a lot of sororities were founded in the idea that women, we could have the same opportunities, and so a lot of our rituals kind of go back to that idea that women can be strong and we can achieve high academics. Like, I feel like it's empowering that it's an all-women's group, especially when it goes back to our founders who fought so hard to have the right to have that type of group on campus. but also like fraternity men, a lot of theirs will talk about being, I would say breaking down that stereotype, being a real man and showing respect to human beings, including women, and when sororities really talk about how to be strong women. And so I think the lessons that you're learning are helping promote gender equality. Like, men should have respect for women, and women have the opportunity to grow and be leaders as well. So I think that by merging the two, like she said, we have honor societies that address that, and we also have Delta Omega that help bring the two together and have shared values. But as far as our values and our original founding principles, I think it goes back to Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. Like, it would, I think, deter from what we're learning and how we're developing within our Greek organizations.
And I think that's a lot about what Greek life is about. You know, we're striving as a community to promote a strong, tight-knit Greek life community, which can include, I mean, it includes both the fraternities and the sororities, so we can be like a strong community there. But I think we can also still have like our sororities and our fraternities, but come together as Greek life.
So I'm not in Greek life, but I was a Girl Scout from kindergarten until I got into high school. And I was actually had an opportunity with some of my Girl Scout friends that we joined Boy Scouts when we were in high school. It's called venturing. We had never camped in negative degree. We had never shot shotguns. We had never tied knots, like they go to the extent of tying knots. And it was quite an experience because we were used to, you know, you come together, you bake cookies, you draw on a ceramic plate and do all this stuff, and then what do? The next week I'm with Boy Scouts and it's a -10, and I get a bead because that's what Boy Scouts do. They go fishing, and I don't know, I would like to see that there be more bringing it together, because I have children now, and it's really hard to explain to my daughter, where she's like, well, I just want to play football and I want to be with the guys, but you know, the girls that are in my class are like, oh, you can't do that because that's what guys do, and it's like, do whatever you want to, just don't get hurt.
Yeah, it really does, it does hit to the allegation by feminists that the female gender role, the things that society says these are activities that females should do, these are activities that males should do, that those prepare you for different roles in society. Just like camping, going out and getting in a new environment and overcoming challenges, you learn things and skills that help you in life more than maybe some of the, I don't know, I don't want to be discriminatory. I mean, what are some of the activities that you women do that the men would not want to do? What are some of them?
So one of the things that I would just say is, like, because you kind of brought up that you'd like to see more of the bringing together. So I don't foresee in the future that the fraternities and sororities are going to ever become fully integrated. I think that they are going to continue to exist as same-sex organizations. But I do think that there are more and more opportunities that are bringing these organizations together. The Order of Omega Honor Society is an honor society for fraternity and sorority members, so it brings them together. The Association of Fraternal Leadership and Values is an umbrella organization that brings both fraternity and sorority members together. There's shared conferences. The NPC governing body and the NIC governing body collaborate to do officer training. So I think while these groups are still going to exist, in part because of tradition and the ritual and the network of alumni and members that they have, I think that those groups are going to continue to exist as single sex, but we are seeing more and more of those opportunities for collaboration because there is an underlying sense of shared values and shared direction and shared tradition. So I think that we'll continue to see more of those kinds of opportunities.
I think it's a matter of personal choice too. If there were a co-ed one and you wanted to join a co-ed, whatever it would be called, then that could be your choice. But I think a lot of us obviously choose to be in a sorority, to be around other women.
Well, you don't have a choice yet, do you?
Well, I mean, if you want to be in
They
one,
join up
then
on the
you.
side, and they do a lot of the same things we do.
If you want to be in a sorority though, I mean, then you choose to be in a sorority. If you didn't want to and they had other choosing to be co-ed, then you could choose to be in that. I mean, if you don't want to be in a sorority around all women, then you don't join. I mean, that's just kind of.
I totally appreciate your point, but I just want to share, I mean, I was in Girl Scouts all the way through, but I did a ton of camping. I did hunting. And I heard you girls.
I'm
I
still a
mean,
Girl Scout,
I think
and
it's
we
all
do
about your
all that.
leaders and what they have you do. I mean, and I was also in a state that had a ton of opportunity for Girl Scouts. So it just depends on what you do.
My mom was our leader. We went to the lake, we stayed at the cabins, we went camping, we did whatever we wanted. No
Well,
matter
that's my
what
main
gender
point,
role
not
was.
that they need to be together, but they do need to do, not necessarily similar things, but things that are equally valuable and can equally help you in accomplishing your life goals. And that's what separate creates the potential for one to do one and one to do the other. So
Well,
it's great it's great that some Girl Scouts do camp and do teach a lot of the skills that are taught at the Boy Scouts. But apparently not all of them are like that.
Well, I think with sororities and fraternities, I mean, we all have those like set of shared values, and we all have some sort of philanthropy that we do. We all have to have good grades to be in a sorority or a fraternity. You know, we all have those sets of standards, whether you're in a sorority or a fraternity. Like, yes, we have maybe some stricter rules set down from nationals or from the National Fan Element Conference, but we all kind of have those.
Well, and what about
shared
networking?
responsibilities.
I mean, that's what I've always been told, is that networking is a main reason why people join a fraternity, because they want to get into a group of people whose fathers or mothers are employers, that they can, and so that's another problem. If you separate those, then, well, this fraternity has all the connections, and this one is not as many. So, I mean, that's another thing that can happen when you separate them.
I feel like just being Greek though allows me to network. I don't have to have a specific title, like Dr. Tisa Mason was a Sigma Kappa. So I don't need to be the same chapter as her because I'm a Delta Zeta, but I can still have that network opportunity. Or Dr. Keegan Nichols, like I still have my network opportunity even though it's outside of mine. Or President Hammond is a SIGAP. Like just being Greek gives me that networking opportunity, not having to have those specific letters.
You think on average the members of sororities have the same career networking opportunities as the males in the fraternities? You believe that?
I think just having, I don't know if I would say the same networking opportunities, but I would say just having Greek gives me the opportunity to network.
sure.
I don't think that I have to have a certain chapter to have that networking opportunity.
So there's a few other main areas, and we'll get back to the concept of networking here in a little bit, but there's a few other kind of like current topics that I'd like to discuss. So one of the things is the concept of like being elite organizations versus elitist. So I'm throwing some stereotypes up here, but an elite organization can be a good thing. You know, having higher expectations, having academic performance expectations, service expectations. Like I said, for my fraternity, a high standard of morality is something that's an expectation for our member. So having these expectations up front and being elite organizations, and recognizing that not everyone is going to be in a fraternity or sorority, that can be a good thing. However, the idea of being elitist, and being elitist means you think you're better than somebody else, and there's really no merit along with that, like you have in your head that you think you're better than somebody else. That can be a very damaging idea to our fraternity and sorority community. That elitist mentality is a lot of times what drives the hazing, is that I'm better than you. In order for you to be a part of me, I'm going to haze you, I'm going to make you earn it. Where by being an elite organization, you set the standard high, you only accept people who meet those high standards, and then you bring them in equal to you. So I think that some groups are trying to figure out what exactly that means. Fired Up Productions talks about a values-based recruiting method. A lot of groups are moving away from the idea of rushing new members into recruiting new members, because why would you want to rush someone into one of the most important decisions of their life? As an organization, why would you want to rush to accept a new member? So I think that this is a conversation of, it's okay to be an elite organization, and it's okay to represent 5 or 10 or 15 or 20% of the student population, and not rather than 80% of the population. But we don't want to have that attitude of being an elitist and I'm better than you kind of an attitude. Housing, I think, is something that is going to continue to come up. I mean, if you've seen in the news, signs like this during freshman drop-offs, move-in days, like those, broken down houses of the 80s and 90s, like that's not something that we want for our organizations. A lot of universities are moving to living learning communities, And a lot of people in the fraternity and sorority world say that fraternities and sororities were the original living, learning community. Members came together, they lived together, they cooked together, they attended classes together. So like having that shared living, learning experience is really good. Having housing that doesn't allow for a positive living and learning experience isn't something that we want. So Fort Hays is moving forward with building on-campus housing that's open to fraternities and sororities. That's one method of addressing this. Some national organizations are moving to national housing corporations, and so putting some money back into housing to make sure that housing is good. Having house mothers, live-in house directors, graduate students that come in and provide these services. So the housing aspect of fraternity and sorority life is a really important part of membership. It's not absolutely necessary, and some groups are very successful in not being housed. And I would actually say that not being housed is a better experience than living in a poor housing situation. So as fraternities and sororities continue, if housing is going to be a part of their experience, we want to make sure that it is a positive experience. And I would argue that fraternities should follow the path of sororities, and that fraternities should remove alcohol from their housing. If you live
house mothers too. That seems so odd for a fraternity.
What?
A house mother.
I don't know. I mean, I've been on some campuses where having a house mother or house director is extremely helpful, and those men come to have a very high level of respect for that woman, and then in turn for other women. So I think there's a lot of, it can be really good. It can be negative too, just depending on where it is. But if fraternities and sororities are going to continue to be a housed experience, for the most part, it needs to be a positive housing experience. I think diverse membership is another issue that we have to continue to work towards. Just because Phi Delta Theta was founded by 6 white Christians doesn't mean that today's Phi Delta Theta should be a collection of white Christians. As we go back to that conversation of open dialogue and active discussion, we benefit by having people in our organizations that agree with or disagree with us and have different viewpoints than we do. As the college campus changes and the rate of students on campuses changes with more first generation, more lower social economic status, and more ethnic backgrounds, like fraternities and sororities should be representative of the colleges that they're at. And so I think that is something that we need to continue to strive for. And that's one of the questions that we've started asking as we bring in our new members is, how do these students identify? And here at Fort Hays, we're still prominently white. Our organizations are prominently white. So how do we incorporate a more diverse population into our community? I think that alcohol and hazing is still something that is definitely real. A lot of times, when you see these things come up in the news, people say, well, that's a minority or a smaller group or whatever. And I believe that is the case. I think that most of our organizations are moving past heavy alcohol consumption and hazing issues, but these kind of things still happen. And so fraternities and sororities are committed to an idea of shared values. They're committed to being elite organizations. So they should be better. They should be the safest places on campus. Their housing should be the safest and the best kept places on campus. So when people ask me if we have an alcohol problem with our fraternities on campus, I ask them if they think we have an alcohol problem at Fort Hays State University. And I think that in some ways that we do. Fraternities and sororities I don't think are any worse here, but in my opinion they should be better. They should be the safest place. They should be the most supportive network. So I think that is something that constantly has to be educated, because one of the exciting things and the pitfalls of fraternities and sororities is every year you're replacing a quarter of your membership, and a quarter of those people are first time away from home. And so there's a lot of these lessons that have to be continually rethought. Because when traditions start to happen, it could be something that was created a year and a half ago, but these students view it as a tradition and it becomes engraved in their lives. And there's that tendency, especially with alcohol and hazing, to kind of one-up what's happened before. So in our community here, I think that one of the best things that we have going for us is that we do have a lot of open lines of communication, and there is a lot of discussion. You know, we participate in Hazing Prevention Week every year, and that week alone stems a lot of conversations, and students they come to me, they go to their advisors, they talk about, they're like, hey, you know, like, we want to do this activity, is this activity okay? You know, I've heard that scavenger hunts aren't allowed, but we want them to go find the library, and we want them to go, you know, find these different things, is that okay? So having those conversations, because just saying, you know, we don't haze, you're not allowed to haze, you'll get in trouble if you're hazing, like, putting up that wall isn't very effective. You know, it needs to be a dialogue of what is hazing, how do they define it, what do they do if they think it's happening. So that open communication is, I think, extremely important in situations like this. I'll try to finish up here. So the last thing, you know, I don't have a specific slide for this, but there's a lot of potential for fraternities and sororities to do a lot of good. So these are examples of Greeks for Good is a nonprofit organization that puts fraternity and sorority members together to do a lot of great things. You see, like, awards, recognition, making donations, mentorship programs, service. Like, there are so many things that fraternities and sororities can do, and I think a lot of that is because of the network, because of the level of involvement that these members have. So we have to continue to utilize our network and continue to utilize these values to move our organizations forward. Because while we need to spend some of our time combating a lot of the negative things that happen, we also have to put even more energy into promoting and pushing and continuing the good, because our organizations are capable of doing a lot of good. You know, on campuses, they've got some of the most involved leaders, they've got some of the most civically minded people. The alumni network is impressive. You look at, like, on the political spectrum, I don't know all the exact statistics, but senators and presidents and all these things, like, there's a huge opportunity for these organizations to continue to leverage and do good things. And so that, you know, while yes, we need to spend some time on working on correcting, we need to put even more time and energy into improving the things that these organizations do well and continuing to make them better and better. So the last thing I have up here, as I mentioned, I'm a member of Phi Delta Theta, and so this is a poem that Arthur R. Priest wrote. It's I believe in the college fraternity. I believe in the college fraternity, creator of friendships. I believe in its quick sympathies and its helping hand. I believe in its brave idealism, stirring every valiant emotion, rousing every potential talent. I believe in its compelling drive for sound scholarship, for genuine culture, for clear-eyed honesty, for business integrity. I believe in the college fraternity, maker of men. I think you can sub a lot of these things out and talk about college sororities in the same way. And I really do. I believe in college fraternities and sororities. I think that we have the ability to do so much. I think that while we're faced with a lot of difficulties at this time, over the course of our 100+ year history, we've faced these difficulties. And so we have to just continue to adapt and change, and because we do have a place on today's college campus, but it's not the same role that we had 10 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So these organizations have to continue to adapt, they have to continue to engage students, grow and change, and be an important part of the college experience. So I think I've got like 1 minute if there's any other questions or comments. I really appreciate the good conversation today. We went off topic of a couple of things that I had, but I think that's great. I think that fraternities and sororities impact so much on campus, and so I think it's fine that you brought up points that maybe I wasn't prepared for, but I definitely appreciate all the dialogue. Any final thoughts? Okay, I'll be coming. Yeah, thank you for having me.
We appreciate it. The American Democracy Project would also like to thank you for coming and participating in these Times Talks. We really appreciate it. This is unfortunately our last Times Talk of the semester. So if you know of anyone who's interested in doing a Times Talk on any certain topic for spring semester, we only have 3 as of right now. So we're really looking for students or faculty and staff that you can talk into doing these kinds of talks. So if you have any, just shoot us an email. So thank you.